Today we're talking about thesis statement, planning, and drafting the paper. I'm going to turn on the lights so the recorder works better. Yeah, that is much better. Okay, so first step, thesis statement. Second step, talking about the parts of the process where we come to and develop a thesis statement. Okay. First and foremost, we need to define what we're talking about here. What is a thesis statement? What does it contain? What are its components? It contains three things. A subject plus significance. It answers the so what question and is arguable. And we need to look at these individually. First and foremost, contains subject plus significance. The topic of your paper plus what you're going to say about it. Okay? Now, for our upcoming paper, it's fairly simple. We're doing a social media essay. Social media, or my involvement or lack of involvement in social media, affects my life this way. Subject, social media, significance, how it affects my life. Okay? That's what we're looking for with subject plus significance. Now, answers to so what question. What this means is it gives your audience a reason to read the essay. You don't want somebody to get to the end of your paper and go, so what? Now, in the case of a social media paper, social media is a fairly common thing in our lives. Most of us have some sort of social media account. Answering the so what question is making it unique to you. Okay? Make sure that when you get done writing your paper that no one else could have written it. That it's specific to your experience. That's what answering the so what question is. If you just say in your thesis, Facebook allows me to keep in touch with friends and share pictures. So what? There's not a whole lot there. But if you say something like, it allows me to keep in touch with family I wouldn't normally be able to keep in contact with, I get to watch my nieces and nephews grow up, something along those lines that makes it unique to your experience, then you're answering the so what question. All right, finally, is it arguable? This doesn't mean argument like yelling and screaming or getting into a fight with your parents or your girlfriend or boyfriend. This means it gives you something to prove throughout the course of the essay. Now remember, just because you say it doesn't necessarily mean that your audience is going to believe it. You have to prove your points with specific example and detail. Okay? So your thesis needs to set you up for something to prove. If you're allowed to watch your nieces and nephews grow up, then I would expect you to describe in detail in your paper how you're doing that. Okay? What kind of pictures are you seeing? What kind of connections are you making? What kind of videos are you seeing? Those types of things. Okay? Questions so far? All right, so we're looking for subject plus significance, answers to so what question, and is arguable. All right, so we're going to go into a little bit more detail about what these things mean, and don't get scared by all of these items that I'm talking about here, because it might seem hard for one or two sentences to do all of this stuff, but it's not as complicated as it may initially seem. We're more or less looking out for things that we want to avoid in a thesis statement. A good thesis statement focuses just on one central point or issue. It's much better to be specific about a few things than general about many things. Now, that's an issue in people's papers, so let me repeat it. It's much better to be specific about a few things than general about many things. And that's a comment I often write, especially on first papers, so I wanted to make sure that we're clear on it. By show of hands, how many of you are involved or have an account in more than 3 social media sites? Okay, a lot of you. We have a relatively short paper. It's only 950 words. It would be difficult, not impossible, but difficult to do a good job on more than 3 social media sites in a short paper like this. So, what being specific about a few things is, you need to narrow the focus to the 2 or 3 most important so you can discuss them in detail rather than just giving a general view of all the social media sites you're involved with. Okay? A specific thesis sets you up to make a clearer argument. Not without fail, but most of the time, if the thesis is unclear, the discussion in the paper is going to be unclear, or it's going to have a lack of focus, it's going to wander, almost always. So we want to be clear with our focus early on in the paper so we know what we're setting out to prove and we know what we're going to do in the essay. Okay, some other things a good thesis is going to do. A good thesis statement tailors the scope of the issue to the length of the paper. This is why it's important to know your assignment. If you know what your audience expects, you can tailor your thesis to your arguments. Okay, question of audience. Who's your audience for your paper? You.
The reader.
Well, who's the reader?
You. Class?
Essentially, it's the class. Yes, I'm the one that's grading your essay, but I read it with an imagined audience, which is your classmates, 18 to whatever your old college students. So, with that audience in mind, even with me in mind, you don't need to necessarily explain exactly what Facebook is. You don't need to explain exactly what Twitter is. You might, give a brief synopsis, but, you don't need to go into great detail about, well, on Facebook it has a blue background, and you can have these things called friends, and you can like posts, and your audience is going to know those kinds of nuts and bolts, okay? Now, if you're talking about a site that's not as popular, then in that case you might have to give some detail. Questions? Alrighty. A good thesis statement gives an accurate forecast of what's to come. Really, after your introduction, there shouldn't be too much in the way of surprises. Okay, we're not writing a mystery novel. Okay, we're stating a purpose in the introduction, trying to prove that purpose in the body, and then have a conclusion. Your thesis provides direction for your entire paper. If you're writing in the writing process and you're writing a paragraph that you maybe like, but you look at your thesis statement and you say, it doesn't really fit, then you need to go back and either rework your thesis or rework the paragraph. A tip I like to give to students as you're writing, most of you are going to be typing on a computer, maybe a tablet, but probably a computer. Take a Post-it note, write your thesis statement down, and tape it to the side of the computer screen. That way you don't have to go back all the way back up to your introduction to see what your thesis statement is. It's right there. You can say, okay, is what I'm writing right now following this thesis? If it's not, it's okay, but something has to change, either the paragraph or the thesis. The writing process, again, is pretty fluid. Every point that you make in your paper should relate to the thesis. As I mentioned, if you find yourself writing something that you like it fits the assignment, but it doesn't fit your thesis, then you need to work on either your thesis or the paragraph. All right, questions before I move on? All right. We want to avoid cliches in thesis statements. A good thesis statement is precise, often previewing the organization of the paper. Avoid cliches in your thesis and statements like, my paper is about, this essay will discuss. I will discuss in this paper. Now, that might be scary for some of you because that was the formula you were given for a thesis in high school. But we want to dump that in college writing and just come out and say what we're going to say. All right? Not this paper. In this paper, I will discuss my involvement in Facebook. Facebook affects my life, blank. It's much stronger. It's much firmer. You're taking control of the writing process. Now, before I move on, somebody define for me cliche. I want to make sure we're all on the same page. What is a cliche? Besides a French word.
It keeps happening the same way. Like most fairy tales say, once upon a time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that certainly would be an example.
Cliche, and then which you kind of start expecting it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How many of you, a lot of you probably have seen interviews after sporting events. What is a cliche, a phrase they use over and over again that an athlete or a coach might say?
We work hard.
We've worked hard. What else? I gave.
At my all.
Not that.
My best.
110%. Yes. We take it one game at a time. We're not looking ahead. These are examples of cliches, phrases that are so overused that they've lost their original meaning. Okay? Cliches and blanket statements tell neither the writer nor the reader what is going on. Now, a blanket statement is also something we want to avoid. Okay? In our writing in general. A blanket statement is something that covers so much that it's either easily disproved or you can't prove it at all. One of the big ones that I see in papers is, since the beginning of time, X, Y, and Z has been true. Were you there? What's the beginning of time? 4 billion years ago, when the Earth was formed? Big Bang? Some people in Judeo-Christian thinking say 6,000 years ago? What was it? My point is that something is easily disproved. Everybody's involved in social media. All 8 billion of us on this planet? That statement's not true. So these are the types of things that we want to avoid in a paper. Okay? Because one of the big things in paper writing in general is having your audience trust you as a writer. And if you use a blanket statement, you're kind of weakening that trust. Okay, questions before I move on? Alrighty. Okay, now remember, and this is part of the quiz, but the first thesis statement that you write does not have to be the last thesis statement that you write. The writing process is fluid. Your essay and your thesis can both change shape during the course of the writing process. In fact, you may turn in your introduction next week, and I may say that the thesis has to be completely reworked, or that there's something that needs work on it. That's not something to be ashamed about. It's part of the process, and we have to learn how to do the process of writing in college in order to be successful not just in this class, but in other classes as well. Okay, so I'm going to give you some sample thesis statements, some common errors that students will have in thesis statements and how to avoid them. A lot of these actually come from your book. There's like a little inset section in the thesis statement chapter that you can review. But these are some common pitfalls that we will see in thesis statements. Here's a thesis that needs work. I want to give my opinion on the national law that sets 21 as the legal age to drink and the reasons I feel this way. Why does this thesis need work?
Because it's telling you what it's going to do. I'll give you my opinion.
Certainly, that's a cliche that we don't want to use. I'm giving my opinion. Yeah, we don't want to use that phrase. What else? What about the content of it?
It doesn't tell you how you're going to explain.
Exactly. It doesn't tell us how they're going to explain. We don't even know what their opinion is. Do they want the drinking age lowered, stay the same, raised? We have no idea. Okay? A good thesis statement is going to have a clearly defined opinion on some subject. Even if it's how social media affects your life, that's what your thesis statement needs to convey. All right, so let's look at a better thesis. To reduce the number of highway fatalities, our country needs to enforce the national law that designates 21 as the legal minimum age to purchase and consume alcohol. Now, in terms of the diction in this thesis statement, do I expect you to be here right now in terms of writing a statement like this? No, but this is something to shoot for. Okay, so why is this better?
Because it tells you exactly what he thinks.
True.
You're not guessing.
Exactly. Now, we have a subject. What's the subject of this essay?
Reduce highway fatality.
Not quite.
Enforce the legal drinking age to 21.
Okay, we need to keep the drinking age 21. That's the subject. The significance is to reduce highway fatalities. Okay, that's what the focus of this paper is going to be on. Subject plus significance. All right? A thesis takes a position on an issue. It is different from a topic sentence in that a thesis statement is not neutral. In other words, it's arguable, that third component of a thesis statement. It announces, in addition to the topic, the argument you want to make or the point you want to prove. This is your own opinion that you intend to back up. Okay, so we need to have a clear statement of intent in the beginning of our paper. All right, number 2. A good thesis asserts one main idea. Here is a thesis that needs work. High school athletes shouldn't have to maintain a B or better grade point average to participate in school sports, and the value for some students is often overlooked. Okay, why does this need work?
They have to tell you why they should not maintain a B.
That's part of it, certainly. There's not really a big significance.
Why?
Remember, we want one clearly defined subject for our paper. There's two. Maintaining one sort of grade point average and the value of school sports. In a 3 to 5 page paper, this is trying to do too much. We want to have one subject in our thesis statement, okay? Here's a better thesis. Because a student with a 2.0 GPA is adequately advancing toward graduation, high school athletes shouldn't have to maintain a B or better grade point average to participate in school sports. Okay, so we've narrowed it to one of the topics. We have a clear thesis statement. The significance here is you're going to argue that somebody who's got a 2.0 is moving toward graduation, so they should be allowed to participate in sports. Some of you may have had parents like mine where I had to have a 3.0 to play sports because of my parents, not because of anything the school did. A thesis should be as specific as possible, and it should be tailored to reflect the scope of the paper. It's not possible, for instance, to write about the history of English literature in a 3 to 5 page paper. Okay, I'm sorry the bottom of this is getting cut off. I'll have to refocus, or have, not me, tech people, refocus it. All right, questions? All right, let's look at another thesis that has some work to do. This is part of the answering the so what question. A good thesis has something worthwhile to say. Thesis that needs work. I don't like to take courses that are held in big lecture classes at this school. Man, I don't care. Stop whining, go to class. You know, that's basically what this is saying. I don't like big lecture classes. This isn't answering the so what question. This isn't enough significance to write a paper about. This doesn't give you anything to prove. It's like saying you don't like bananas or you don't like ice cream. It's okay, you know, you don't really have to prove it. Let's look at something that answers the so what question. Large lecture classes provide a core environment for the student who learns best through interaction with both teachers and peers. Okay, this is much more specific. Has a good take on the issue. What type of students is this essay going to talk about? College students, but a specific type of college student. The one that needs more interaction. If you guys have taken orientation or you're in orientation right now, you'll see your learning style. Some people are more kinesthetic type of learners. They need to touch, feel, interact in order to learn. Big lecture halls are bad for that. That's what this is going to focus on, okay? It doesn't come off as, I just don't like big lecture halls. It's actually going to give something to prove throughout the course of the essay. Try to select a subject that will interest, amuse, challenge, persuade, or enlighten your readers. If the subject is pretty commonplace, find a unique approach or an unusual, perhaps controversial point of view. I mentioned this earlier, but we're doing a social media essay. Pretty commonplace topic. But if you make it unique to your experience, how it affects you specifically, then you're adding a unique turn to it. All right, so you're taking a commonplace subject, making it unique to you. Okay, that works. Questions before I move on? All right. There's 6 of these, so bear with me. You guys are doing a great job. A good thesis is limited to fit the assignment. Here's a thesis that needs work. Nuclear power should be banned as an energy source in this country. Could you write a book about this?
Yes.
Absolutely, you could. In terms of making an argument for looking at Chernobyl or 3 Mile Island or the disaster in Japan a couple of years ago. Yes, this is a big topic. It'd be hard to write a short paper on why it should be banned. You probably could, but we would want it to be a little bit more specific for our purposes. So let's look at one that does a little bit better job. Because of its poor safety record during the past 2 years and the recent waste leak into the water table, Collin County Nuclear Power Plant should be closed. All right, are we talking about nuclear power in the entire country?
No.
No, we have one plant for very specific reasons. We have a subject, plant should be closed. Why? Significance, recent waste leak, and poor safety record. A good argumentative thesis provides not only a clear position on an issue, but also suggests the structure of the paper. In addition, your thesis should show that you have narrowed your subject matter to an appropriate size for your essay. All right, it does preview the organization of the paper. All right, which one of these 2 items would you expect the author to talk about first?
On the poor safety record.
Poor safety record, and then talk about the recent waste leak. Would you have to do it this way? No. English, unlike math and some other things, it's not an exact science. There's many ways to approach papers, which for some students it drives them nuts. For students like I was, we enjoy it. It just depends on who you are as a student. But do keep in mind and be okay with the fact that in English there's many ways to approach writing. All right, so number 5, the incontestable thesis. Thesis that needs work. The women's movement is good for our country. Most rational human beings would argue or agree that equality is a good thing. Okay? This is hard to defend because it doesn't say much. All right? Here's a better thesis because, again, it's more specific. It's better focus. The Colorado Women's Party is working to ensure the benefits of equal pay for equal work for both males and females in this state. This gives us something to prove throughout the course of the essay. We have to prove what the Colorado Women's Party is doing, how they're working hard, etc. A thesis must be arguable. Okay, gives you something to prove throughout the course of the essay. And in order for it to be arguable, it must present a view that someone might reasonably contest. Sometimes a thesis ultimately says we should be good or bad things are bad. Such thesis statements are so universally accepted that there's no need to prove the point. We want to avoid statements of fact. Okay? Facebook affects a lot of people. Social media affects my life greatly. These don't give you much to prove throughout the course of the paper, so you want to focus on something that's specific to you. All right? Questions? All right, last but not least, the inflammatory thesis, something we want to avoid. It doesn't mean setting your readers on fire. Here's a thesis that needs work. We need to limit hate speech because the people who support the right to say nasty things are Neanderthals. And I say tall because in French they don't have the sound. That's where it was found, in Neander Valley in France. Is this nice to call your readers names?
No.
No. And also, if your reader doesn't agree with you, they might tune you out. And that's something we don't want. We can't convince a reader, or we can't have a discussion with the reader if they've tuned you out. Okay? So think of writing this to prove a point, but we have an even tone. You're having tea, not screaming at each other. Something like that. Here's a better thesis. Although Fish makes a compelling argument about hate speech legislation, he fails to acknowledge the social and economic factors that make hate speech legislation beneficial to people's neighborhoods and pocketbooks. You're not calling the other side's name. names, you're saying, okay, you have a valid argument, but this is why I disagree. We have reasons to prove throughout the course of the essay, and we're clear. Keeping an even tone is important in academic writing. And in an essay where you are making an argument, it's essential to keep an even tone. Otherwise, your audience may not take you seriously. You must keep a level, non-combative tone because it will make your argument more believable by parties on both sides of the issue. In some cases, some of you might be writing about how you don't use social media anymore, or you don't like it. Even though you may have some angst or some anger towards social media because something bad happened to you, you need to rein that in a little bit because your audience is going to take you less seriously if it looks like you're losing your temper on the page. This isn't a place to vent, this is a place to report. If that makes sense. Okay? Questions? All right. Now, we need to talk about the location of the thesis before we get into brainstorming an essay. Many students want to put a thesis as the first sentence of the essay. We want to just get it out there. Here's my focus. Why would we want to avoid that? Can somebody just kind of brainstorm a reason?
You're not giving, it distracts the reader because usually you give them something else to help them get into the thesis, like it's breaking the ice.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't break the ice, then they think you're arrogant, and no one wants to read an arrogant story.
Okay, yeah, and essays are about keeping the reader, as I just mentioned. Yeah, if we just start our paper with a thesis statement that we haven't warmed up our reader at all. They don't know what the topic is. How can you provide a focus without knowing what the topic is? Typically, a good thesis is going to be the last or second to last sentence of the first paragraph. The reader wouldn't know what the essay is about. You have to give us an idea, warm us up, introduce the reader to the topic. Then we can provide our focus at the end of the paragraph. Now, the reason that I say that it's typically the last or second to last is sometimes the way that the thesis is written, you need an additional sentence to transition to the next paragraph. Okay? So, we want it to be the last or second to last sentence of the first paragraph. All right, questions before we move on? Yes?
If it's somewhat in the middle, because you need a couple of sentences to make sure that you transition okay, is that alright?
Yeah, well, it probably wouldn't be in the middle, because a good introduction is going to be probably about 6 to 8 sentences. So even if it takes you a couple of sentences to transition, it's still going to be toward the end. So, yeah, I guess it would be more toward the middle, but it should still be closer to the end than in the beginning. Other questions? All right. Now, before we move on to the second part of this PowerPoint, I just want to review what I've talked about with the thesis statement. Good thesis has 3 things: subject plus significance, answers to so what question, and is arguable. Okay? A good thesis tailors to the scope of the issue or to the length of the paper. Knowing your assignment is a critical part of the writing process. I typically tell students you should read the assignment sheet a minimum of 4 times. Once when we go over it in class, once before you begin brainstorming and writing a rough draft, once before you write your final draft after we've done peer review, and then one more time before you turn it in. Am I meeting all the requirements of this essay? Okay, so probably a minimum of 4 times you should read that assignment sheet. A good thesis provides an accurate forecast of what's to come. Again, there shouldn't be a whole lot in the way of surprises in a paper after an introduction. All right? A good thesis is precise, often previewing the organization of the paper. Now, again, I want to reiterate, be open-minded about your thesis statement. You don't have to be handcuffed to the first thing that you write. Okay? always consider your thesis until you turn something in, your working thesis. And then you might even work on it some more after you've turned it in if you choose to revise. So be open-minded. This is a fluid process that you can, it can change, and that's okay. All right, any questions? All right, well, let's talk about planning and drafting a paper. So we talked about thesis statements. How do we get to our focus of our paper? But there are some steps along the way, both before and after, before we write a rough draft. You don't just say, okay, this is my working thesis, and you begin to type. We need to plan and draft a paper. We need to put it together in such a way that it's well thought out. Okay? The typing should be the easy part. Let me repeat that. The typing should be the easy part. Because if you've thought out your paper, you've thought out your arguments, your discussions, how you're going to prove those things beforehand, it makes the typing part easy. Now, you may be used to just sitting down and typing your paper the night before it's due. Sometimes that's unavoidable, but it shouldn't be our goal. Our goal should be to plan out papers, write them early so we can kind of let them sit, and revise them before the final draft so we have as good a product as we can get out there. Okay, so there's 6 stages to planning and drafting your paper. This comes from the first chapter of your book. Understanding the assignment, zeroing in on a topic, gathering information, organizing information, developing a thesis, and writing the first draft. Notice that developing a thesis is fairly late in the writing process. Okay? That we need to organize our thoughts just like we need to introduce our thoughts in the paper before we get to a focus. All right, so first step, understanding the assignment. Understanding the directions is the key to success with any assignment. Remember, English 101 is a class that's required for everybody. So you're not just learning skills about composition, how to put together an essay, but also skills that will help you in any class. Ask or write down questions as soon as they occur to you, and make sure that you get clarification from your instructor. Again, that's why it's important to make sure that you don't just look at the assignment sheet once and then go off of memory. You need to make sure that you're understanding every part of the assignment. Also taking notes in class, because oftentimes when we're doing work in class, I'm going to be giving you information about how what we're doing in class applies to your paper. Those are things you need to write down. If I say, well, this is how it applies to your paper, or this is a good example of something I want you to do in your paper, that's stuff you need to write down, okay? Don't assume you have a photographic memory. Take the notes so you have something to go on later. All right, so we understand the assignment. Now we need to kind of zero in on a topic. What are we going to write about? Take all the information that's in your brain and start to narrow it down a little bit. Students often have difficulty narrowing down a topic. Here are some strategies to beat the writer's block. Tap into your personal resources. If you're not sure how social media affects your life, ask a parent, ask a friend. Probably going to get different answers there. But somebody that you know and trust might give you a little bit different opinion. If you're not really involved in social media, talk to somebody and find out, what you might be missing. That's all fuel for this paper. Keep a journal. We not only have a journal in class, but for each paper you might want to have a little notebook to write down things as they occur to you. Sorting out a subject. Okay, so I've got a lot of information here. How do I kind of narrow it down? I'm really involved in social media. Which ones affect me the most? You might do some brainstorming activities like listing or bubbling or things of that nature. Ask questions. Free writing. Oftentimes the free writes in class, the journal activities are going to be geared towards your paper. Brainstorming, and I think this is a picture of Ivan, just now 10 years ago, amazingly enough. Brainstorming is a great way to just get your ideas on the page. It makes it less scary to write. If you have just words on a piece of paper, even if it's 90% of it doesn't end up in your paper, it makes starting to write less scary, okay? Because you started the process. Writer's block comes from not wanting to get started. Once you just get something on the page, it's helpful to for most people to get started from there. All right, so we've understood the assignment. We've kind of narrowed down our focus. Now we gather information. Now this may seem not that different from the previous one, but it is insofar as once we brainstorm and we know, okay, I want to look at how I use Instagram, Twitter, and Tumblr. Okay, those are the three I want to look at. Now we can do even more listing. We can do even more bubbling, more brainstorming on those topics. Try to get everything you have on the page. Why would you want to go overboard like this? Well, we have a 950-word minimum for the paper. What if you write your rough draft after you go through this process and you only got 850 words? Well, if you've done a lot of brainstorming, you can go back to those notes and say, oh, I decided not to include that, but I can add that to my paper now. It gives you more information, it gives you stuff to work on. Or, if you revise your paper down the road after it's been graded and you want a better grade, if you take these notes now, you might have more to go on later. All right? So it's a good idea to just do this type of planning. It's going to create that focus in the thesis statement that we want in a paper, so it doesn't wander. It stays on topic with your focus. All right, so another way, as I mentioned before, you might read on the topic. Now, this isn't a research paper per se, but looking at a couple of news articles on how, say, Facebook or cyberbullying has affected someone across the country, might jar a memory for you of, oh yeah, I did have a situation where I had a problem on Facebook, or somebody that was stalking me on Twitter or something like that. Talk with others. Again, this isn't a bad idea. Talk with people who may not give you a rosy opinion on how you use social media. They may tell you use it too much. All this is going to be, again, fuel for your paper. The more fuel that you have, the better your paper is going to be, because you can be specific rather than general. Again, what we're going for in an essay. Okay, so now we're organizing the information, which usually comes in the form of an outline. Now, I know many of you probably avoid outlining your paper. I've even had students tell me, well, I can't write an outline until I write the essay. Do you build a house and then write the blueprint? No, an essay is similar. You have to know how you're going to construct your paper before you do the constructing. Now, always have a flexible note system. Again, being flexible in the writing process allows for new thoughts to come up, new ideas, or allows you to change things if something's not working. Your ideas do not need to be the same throughout the writing process. Don't be afraid to experiment with note-taking systems. If you're not used to brainstorming, try some of the techniques that you read about in your book. Having notes will help you if you have to go back to revise your paper, as I mentioned before. Now, creating an outline. Typically, you're going to use the topic outline. That's the Roman numeral 1, introduction. A, B, C, this is what I'm going to say in the introduction. Roman numeral 2, first argument, might be Facebook. This is how I use Facebook. This is how it affects me. This is stuff I want to discuss. That type of outline. As I mentioned earlier, if you do the pre-work, the typing is easy. If you have a detailed outline, you just have to look at the blueprint and fill in the blanks. Okay? As you're typing, you can say, okay, this is all the things I wanted to say in this first body paragraph. This is all the things I wanted to say in the second body paragraph, and so on. Writing that clear outline makes the writing process way, way easier. Okay? Now, another type of outline that some students like to use is the sentence outline. This is where you write out what you want to say in more detail. I think this is less used because many students view this as kind of writing your paper twice, which has its advantages because it gives you an extra draft for paper. It will make for a better paper. But rather than saying introduction, you might have Roman numeral 1, and then in a sentence you say, in my introduction I'd like to cover these main points, this is the reason why, and so on. some people's brains work that way, so I wouldn't shy away from it if that's what works best for you. Okay? Questions? And I don't have the exact page number, but there is a couple pages in your book on writing an outline. If you just look in the appendix, it'll tell you where those pages are. They're going to be part of our reading. I just don't have the exact pages memorized. Okay, so now we're ready. We know what we want to write about. What is our focus? Okay? And sometimes in the writing process, you have to go backwards in steps. You say, okay, this is what I want to write about. How does social media affect my life overall? You can look at your outline and say, okay, these are all the things I want to talk about, and kind of work a thesis that way. Now, you may develop a thesis and go back to your outline and say, ooh, I need to tinker with that a little bit. This isn't a complete order. This step, this step, this step, this step. Sometimes you go 1 to 2, then 2 makes you go back to 1 for a little bit, and you go to 2 to 3 to 4. Okay, you did some work on 4, you have to go back to 3, and so on. Okay, so don't think of this as regimented. This is a guideline more than anything else. Questions? Okay, now we're ready to write that first draft. We have a working thesis statement. We have an outline where we can see this is the direction I want my paper to go. Now we can start either writing or typing. Some people feel more comfortable writing a first draft. I always did as a student because in the process of typing it, it would give me a second draft because I would correct things as I was typing it into the computer. It's all personal preference. But have your thesis, your notes, and outline accessible and visible. As I mentioned earlier, put a Post-it note on the side of your computer screen with your working thesis so you know you're staying focused on that thing throughout the writing process. Double space. For most people, the way that our eyes work is we're going to catch things better, see things better if it's double spaced, okay? So I would advise you to double space your rough draft, especially if you're typing it, because it'll allow you to read your work better. Write quickly and just concentrate on getting the first draft on the page. That is really important. If you've done your work with your outline and your working thesis, again, you're kind of just, you have the menu, you're just making the meal, okay? If you have a good outline, the initial draft should come out really quickly. You may have to go back and change some things, but write quickly. Get it on the page. Again, you're going to feel so much better about yourself if you have something on the page than if you're just staring at a blank screen. Take breaks at logical dividing points. However, if you tend to procrastinate, set a time limit for the break and stick to it. You're all glued to your phones, most of us are. You've got a timer, no matter what your phone is, you have a timer on it, okay? Set a timer for the break and stick to it. Or say, I'm going to watch this 30-minute sitcom and get back to my paper. Whatever it might be for your break, make sure that you stick to it. Questions? All right. That's the end of the slideshow. Anybody have any final questions about thesis statements, writing process, any of that? Okay, let me turn off the video.